I never expected that a brutal summer heat wave would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It wasn't the heat itself, not really. It was the man who worked in it, and the absolutely ridiculous, impossibly vulnerable request he made of me one sweltering Tuesday afternoon. That's how life works sometimes, isn't it? The biggest shifts don't announce themselves with thunder and lightning, but with a quiet knock on the door. My name is Miles. At the time, I was a 32-year-old freelance graphic designer living a life that was, for all intents and purposes, perfectly fine. I worked from home, a small but comfortable house I'd bought a few years prior, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The biggest selling point had been the backyard. It was large and lush, a private little slice of green that I had grand ambitions for. I imagined weekend barbecues, a small garden, maybe even a hammock strung between the two old oak trees. Of course, reality had other plans. The grand ambitions quickly wilted under the combined heat of my demanding workload and my complete lack of a green thumb. The yard became less of a private oasis and more of a looming, overgrown responsibility. So, I did what any self-respecting adult with disposable income and zero landscaping skills does. I hired someone. That someone was Caleb. He was part of a local crew, but after the first week, he was the only one who ever showed up. He was probably in his late 20s, with broad shoulders and arms that were a testament to his line of work. His skin was tanned to a deep bronze from his hours in the sun, and his light brown hair was perpetually damp with sweat, clinging to his forehead and the nape of his neck. My office was on the second floor, with a large window that overlooked the backyard. It became my perch. I'd sit at my desk, ostensibly working on a branding package for some tech startup, but my eyes would inevitably drift downward to the figure moving with a steady, relentless rhythm below. I watched him tame the chaos I'd let fester. He mowed the unruly lawn into neat, satisfying stripes. He wrestled with overgrown hedges, trimming them into respectable shapes. He knelt for hours in the flower beds, patiently pulling weeds, his back a long, graceful curve. I told myself my fascination was purely professional. I was a designer. I appreciated aesthetics, form, and function. And there was an undeniable artistry to what he did. He wasn't just clearing brush, he was sculpting the space. But that was a convenient, professional lie I told myself to keep a comfortable distance. The truth was, I was lonely. My life was a quiet loop of deadlines, takeout, and streaming services. And Caleb, this vibrant, dynamic man working just outside my window, was a stark, beautiful contrast to my own static existence. I found myself learning the little details of his routine. He always arrived at 8 in the morning, his old blue pickup truck rumbling to a stop at the curb. He'd drink from a massive, dented water jug throughout the day. Around noon, he'd sit in the shade of the larger oak tree to eat his lunch, usually a sandwich from a brown paper bag. I watched, and I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. It was a mix of admiration, attraction, and the sad, familiar certainty that he existed in a different world than I did. He was the kind of effortlessly masculine, confident guy I'd always found impossibly beautiful and completely unattainable. He was, I assumed, straight. Just a man doing a job, unaware of the quiet observer in the window above. Then the heat wave hit. It wasn't just hot, it was oppressive. The air grew thick and heavy, like a wet blanket you couldn't throw off. News reports warned people to stay indoors. The cicadas buzzed with a frantic, desperate energy. From my air-conditioned sanctuary, I watched Caleb work through it. His t-shirt, usually a dark gray, was soaked through within an hour, clinging to his chest and back. He'd pause more often, wiping his brow with the back of a gloved hand, his chest heaving. A knot of guilt tightened in my stomach. It felt wrong, sitting in my climate-controlled bubble while he toiled in that suffocating heat. A few times, I filled a pitcher with ice water and lemonade and left it on the back porch for him, retreating inside before he could see me. From my window, I'd watch him discover it. He'd look toward the house with a slightly confused expression, then give a small, grateful wave to the empty window before pouring himself a glass. Each time, my heart would do a stupid little flutter. The day it all changed was a Tuesday. The temperature had climbed to a record high. The heat shimmered in visible waves above the asphalt on the street. Caleb had spent the morning digging out the roots of a stubborn old stump near the back fence. It was brutal, back-breaking work. By late afternoon, his pace had slowed considerably. He moved as if wading through molasses. I saw him stumble once, catching himself on the handle of his shovel. The guilt I felt was sharp and insistent. At 4 o'clock, he finally stopped. He packed up his tools, his movements slow and deliberate. I watched him walk toward the front of the house, assuming he was leaving for the day. I felt a wave of relief. But a few minutes later, my doorbell rang. My heart hammered against my ribs. In the months he'd been working for me, we'd never spoken beyond a polite hello or a nod. I opened the door, and there he was. He was standing on my porch, his work gloves tucked into the back pocket of his jeans. His face was flushed a deep, alarming red, and sweat dripped from his chin onto the welcome mat. His eyes looked glassy, and his breathing was shallow. "Hey," he said, his voice raspy. "Sorry to bother you. Could I maybe get a glass of water? I think I might have overdone it a bit today." "Of course, yes, come in," I said, my own voice sounding unnaturally high. I stepped back, and he shuffled inside, bringing the thick, humid scent of sun, sweat, and freshly cut grass with him. The blast of air conditioning from the vents made him visibly shudder with relief. He leaned against the doorframe, closing his eyes for a moment. I rushed to the kitchen, my hands fumbling slightly as I grabbed the largest glass I could find and filled it with ice and water. When I returned, he was still standing in the entryway, looking slightly dazed. I handed him the glass, and he drank the entire thing in a series of long, desperate gulps, the ice clinking against his teeth. "Thank you," he breathed, handing the empty glass back to me. "Seriously, thank you. It's no problem. Are you okay? You look really overheated." He nodded slowly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Yeah, I think I need a minute to cool down before I try to drive." He looked around my living room, at the cool hardwood floors and the ceiling fan spinning lazily. And then he looked at me, his gaze direct and strangely intense, despite his exhaustion. He swallowed, a look of deep uncertainty crossing his features. "This is going to sound really, really weird," he started, his voice low and hesitant. "And you should absolutely say no if it's too much. But, my coach in college, for football, he told us if a guy was overheating bad, the fastest way to bring his core temp down was skin-to-skin contact with someone who was cool." I just stared at him, my brain struggling to process the words. I had no idea where this was going. He took a shaky breath and pushed on, his eyes not leaving mine. I was wondering, and again, this is crazy, but would it be okay if I just laid on the floor for a few minutes? With my head on your chest? Just until I stop feeling so dizzy. Your house is so cool, and I need to cool down fast. Silence hung in the air between us. It was the strangest, most vulnerable request I had ever heard. Every rational thought in my head was screaming that this was bizarre, that there had to be a dozen other ways for him to cool down. But then I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the genuine distress in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands, the sheer, debilitating exhaustion etched into his face. This wasn't a pickup line. It was a desperate, unconventional plea for help. And my heart, that stupid, traitorous organ, didn't feel weirded out. It felt a deep, resonant ache of compassion. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word coming out as a soft whisper. "Yeah, okay." Caleb's shoulders slumped in what looked like profound relief. "Really? Thank you. I swear I'm not a creep." A small, nervous laugh escaped me. "I don't think you are." I led him into the living room, my mind reeling. The air from the vents was cold on my skin, but I felt flushed, my blood buzzing. This was not how I had pictured my Tuesday afternoon unfolding. He toed off his heavy work boots by the door, leaving them neatly by the mat. He was wearing a dark gray t-shirt that was almost black with sweat. Without a word, he grabbed the hem and pulled it over his head in one fluid motion, dropping it onto the floor. My breath caught in my throat. His chest and stomach were slick with a sheen of sweat, the muscles of his torso clearly defined. It was the body I had only ever seen in motion, from a distance, and now it was here, in my living room. I gestured awkwardly toward the center of the room. "Here. Yeah, this is perfect." He lay down on his side on the hardwood floor, then looked up at me expectantly. For a second, I just stood there, frozen. What was I supposed to do? It felt like a stage direction for a play I hadn't read. Then I remembered my role in this surreal scene. I was the cooling agent. Taking a deep breath, I sat down on the floor, then carefully lowered myself onto my back, my own t-shirt feeling flimsy and inadequate. The floor was cool against my skin. I rested my head on a decorative pillow from the couch and waited. Caleb shifted, moving with a weary grace, and then he was there. He settled his head onto my chest, his damp cheek resting just over my heart. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. A jolt, like a low-grade electric shock, went through me. His skin was incredibly hot, radiating heat like a furnace, but it was also damp and soft. His weight was a solid, grounding presence on me. I could feel the thrum of his pulse, rapid and shallow, and I was intensely aware of my own heartbeat, which had kicked into a frantic, hammering rhythm directly beneath his ear. I hoped he couldn't hear how fast it was going. We lay there in silence for a long time. The only sounds were the hum of the air conditioner, the slow whir of the ceiling fan, and the sound of our breathing. His was ragged at first, but slowly, gradually, it began to deepen and even out. The initial awkwardness began to melt away, replaced by a strange and profound intimacy. I could smell him, the scent of cut grass, soil, sun, and the clean, salty smell of his sweat. It was earthy and real and overwhelmingly masculine. It was the smell of the world outside my window, a world I only ever observed, and now it was resting on top of me. I found myself relaxing into the moment, my own body softening against the floor. I tentatively lifted my hand and placed it on his back, between his shoulder blades. His skin was slick and hot, but I felt his muscles tense for a second under my touch, and then relax completely, as if in surrender. It felt like a gesture of comfort, a silent message that it was okay, that he was safe. My dad used to own a landscaping business, he murmured, his voice muffled against my shirt. The sudden sound made me jump slightly. I started working for him when I was 14. He always said the heat will trick you, makes you think you're tougher than you are. It's been brutal out there, I said softly, my voice sounding a little shaky. I've been worried. Watching you, the admission slipped out before I could stop it. He shifted his head slightly, and I could feel the subtle movement of his cheek against my chest. You watch me. There was no judgment in his tone, just a quiet curiosity. My face burned. My office window looks out over the yard. It's hard not to notice. I hoped it sounded casual, observational. He was quiet for a moment. It's a nice yard, he said finally. You have good taste. The hydrangeas by the fence just need a little help. We fell back into a comfortable silence. He talked a little more, in a low, drowsy voice. He told me he was saving up to go back to school, that he wanted to study landscape architecture. He said he loved the work, the feeling of transforming a space, but he was tired of the physical toll. He wanted to be the one designing the gardens, not just digging them. As he spoke, I realized how completely my perception of him had been wrong. I'd seen him as a body, a physical presence, a symbol of a life lived out in the sun. I'd painted him as a simple, confident jock type. But lying here, listening to him talk about his dreams, feeling the vulnerability in his exhaustion, I was seeing someone else entirely. He was thoughtful, ambitious, and maybe, just maybe, a little lonely too. The confident exterior was armor against the heat, against the judgment of others, against the difficulty of the work. His body began to cool. The radiating heat lessened, and the dampness of his skin was replaced by a pleasant warmth. His breathing was deep and steady now, almost the rhythm of sleep. He felt heavier against me, more settled. I realized he was falling asleep. A powerful wave of protectiveness washed over me. I kept my hand on his back, my thumb tracing slow, absent-minded circles on his skin. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. He didn't pull away. If anything, he seemed to press into the touch, a small, almost imperceptible sigh escaping his lips. In that small, quiet moment, something shifted. The boundary between a client and a contractor, between a stranger and something else, had completely dissolved. He must have slept for 10 or 15 minutes. I didn't move a muscle, content to just lie there, feeling the weight of him, listening to him breathe. I studied the way the light from the window caught the stray hairs on his arm, the pattern of freckles across his shoulders. It was an intimacy I hadn't experienced in years, and it was happening on my living room floor with a man whose last name I didn't even know. Then, his breathing changed. It hitched slightly, and I knew he was waking up. He stirred, and the spell of sleepy tranquility was broken. He lifted his head slowly, blinking a few times as if disoriented. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, his face now just inches from mine. His eyes, a warm hazel flecked with green, were clear now. The glassy, exhausted look was gone. He stared at me, his gaze searching and intense. In the closeness, I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the faint scar that cut through one of his eyebrows. My own breath caught in my chest. The air between us grew thick and charged, filled with everything that hadn't been said. His eyes flickered down to my lips, then back up to my eyes. The movement was so small, so quick, but it felt like a seismic event. My heart, which had just calmed down, started a frantic, hopeful drumming against my ribs again. This was it. This was the moment where everything could change. It was a question hanging in the air between us, a silent, breathless inquiry. I didn't know what to do. Should I lean in? Should I wait? My mind was a chaotic mess of hope and fear. Hope that this was what I thought it was, and a paralyzing fear that I was wrong, that I was about to make a fool of myself and shatter this fragile, beautiful moment. But Caleb didn't kiss me. He just held my gaze for a few seconds longer, a complicated emotion swirling in his eyes. It looked like a mixture of gratitude, confusion, and something else, something deeper that I couldn't quite decipher. Then he broke the contact, pushing himself up into a sitting position. The warmth and weight of him were gone, and a sudden coldness rushed in to fill the space. He ran a hand through his damp hair, avoiding my eyes. "Wow," he said, his voice rough. I can't believe I fell asleep. I am so sorry." "Don't be," I said, sitting up as well. The sudden movement made me feel a little lightheaded. "You were clearly exhausted. Do you feel better?" "Yeah," he said, finally looking at me. He gave me a small, hesitant smile. 1,000 times better. "Thank you, Miles. I mean it. You really helped me out." He stood up, and I watched as he grabbed his discarded t-shirt. He didn't put it back on, just held it in his hand as if he'd forgotten what it was for. The air was thick with a new kind of awkwardness. The easy intimacy of the past half hour had vanished, replaced by a tense, uncertain awareness. We were no longer just two people in a room. We were two people who had shared something incredibly strange and personal, and neither of us knew what to do with it. "Well," he said, moving toward the door, "I should let you get back to your day. The yard is almost done. I should have it finished up by tomorrow afternoon." "Okay," I said, following him into the entryway. It felt like watching a dream dissolve upon waking. He pulled on his boots, his movements quick and efficient now, as if he were suddenly desperate to leave. He grabbed the doorknob, then paused, turning back to face me. "Seriously, Miles, thank you for not thinking I was a total psycho." "Anytime," I said, and I meant it. He gave me one last look, that same unreadable expression on his face, and then he was gone. I closed the door behind him and leaned my forehead against the cool wood. My living room felt huge and empty. The only evidence he had been there was his sweat-soaked t-shirt, still lying in a heap on the floor, and the faint, lingering scent of grass and sun. My own shirt was damp where his head had rested. I touched the spot, right over my heart, and it felt like my skin was tingling. The next day was torture. I sat at my desk, unable to focus on a single thing. My gaze was fixed on the backyard, waiting for the sound of his truck. He arrived at his usual time, but everything felt different. There was a new, humming tension in the air that was all in my head, or maybe it wasn't. He got to work on the last remaining patch of overgrown weeds, his movements just as efficient as always, but I couldn't help but project a whole new narrative onto them. Did he seem more reserved? Was he avoiding looking toward the house? Was he regretting what had happened? My mind became a relentless analysis machine. I replayed every second of the previous afternoon. The request, the way he felt on my chest, the things he'd said, the look in his eyes right before he left. I dissected it from every possible angle. One part of me, the hopeful, romantic part, was convinced it meant something. The vulnerability of the request, the lingering, the intense eye contact, it all pointed to something more than just a man trying to avoid heat stroke. He could have just sat in the air conditioning. He could have used a cold towel. He chose a method that was deeply, unavoidably intimate. That had to mean something, right? But the other part of me, the cautious, self-protective part that had been in charge for most of my adult life, was screaming that I was being an idiot. It was just the heat. He was disoriented, maybe even delirious. He remembered some weird trivia from his football days, and, in a moment of desperation, he acted on it. He needed a cool body, and I was the only one available. It was purely functional. The intimacy was a byproduct, an accident. The look in his eyes was probably just embarrassment. I oscillated wildly between these two theories. One moment, I'd be soaring with a giddy, terrifying hope. The next, I'd be crashing back to earth, bracing for the humiliation of having profoundly misread the situation. I imagined him telling his friends about the weird, lonely guy whose chest he had to sleep on. The thought made my stomach clench with shame. Around lunchtime, he sat under the oak tree as usual. I almost went down to offer him another lemonade, but I stopped myself. I felt paralyzed by the uncertainty. What if I went down there and he was cold and distant? The rejection would be more than I could handle. So I just watched from my window, my prison perch, feeling more separate from him than ever before. He finished the yard around 3 o'clock. He packed up his tools for the last time, loading them into the bed of his truck. This was it. The job was done. He had no reason to come back. He would send an invoice, I would pay it, and he would disappear from my life, becoming nothing more than a strange, heat-induced memory. The thought left a hollow ache in my chest. I watched him get into his truck. He sat there for a long moment, his hands on the steering wheel, just staring ahead. My heart sank. He was going to drive away. I had missed my chance. I had let fear win. I turned away from the window, unable to watch him leave. And then, the doorbell rang. It was a different sound this time. Not the hesitant ring of yesterday, but a firm, decisive one. My blood ran cold, then hot. I walked to the door like a man walking to his own execution, or maybe his coronation. I had no idea which. I opened it. It was Caleb. He wasn't in his work clothes anymore. He'd changed into a clean t-shirt and jeans. He'd clearly gone home and showered. His hair was still damp, and he smelled of soap and something fresh, like sandalwood. He looked nervous, his hands shoved into his pockets, but his expression was resolute. "Hey," he said. "Hi." I managed to reply, my voice barely a squeak. Can we talk for a minute?" he asked. I just nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He walked into the living room and stood in the very spot where we had lain on the floor less than 24 hours earlier. I closed the door and stood there, my back against it, my heart feeling like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. He turned to face me, pulling his hands from his pockets and rubbing them on his jeans. "Look, I need to apologize for yesterday," he started, and my stomach plummeted. Here it comes, I thought. The letdown. "And I also need to be honest," he continued, his eyes meeting mine. I was overheated. That part was true. I really did feel like I was going to pass out. But the other part, the skin-to-skin thing. I mean, it's a real thing, but it was also an excuse. I stared at him, my mind blanking. An excuse? He took a deep breath. "I've seen you. In the window. For months now. I'd be working, and I'd look up, and sometimes you'd be there, watching. And I wanted to talk to you, to get to know you, but I had no idea how. I'm your landscaper. You're my client. There are lines, you know." He gestured vaguely around the room. "And I'm not always great at this stuff." I didn't know what to say, and I figured you were probably straight, and I was just this sweaty guy tearing up your yard, and I was going to completely misread everything and make a fool of myself. He paused, his gaze earnest and incredibly vulnerable. Yesterday, with the heat, it was real, but it was also an opportunity. It was a stupid, crazy, desperate long shot. It was the only way I could think of to get close to you, to ask for something that wasn't about the lawn or the hedges. I just hoped. I hoped maybe you wouldn't say no. And when you didn't, I totally panicked afterward. I thought I'd completely freak you out. A tidal wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees buckle. It wasn't in my head. It was real. All of it. The hope that I had been so afraid to cling to was actually real. "You didn't freak me out," I said, and my voice was finally steady. "Caleb, I was watching you because I wanted to get to know you too. I thought you were beautiful. I thought you were straight. I thought there was no chance." A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face. It transformed him, chasing away all the nervousness and leaving behind pure, unadulterated joy. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Definitely not straight." He took a step toward me, then another, until he was standing right in front of me. He was so close I could feel the warmth coming off him. "So," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. "Just to be clear, if I were to kiss you right now, it wouldn't be weird." "No," I breathed. "It would be overdue." And then he closed the small distance between us. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His touch was gentle but firm. And he kissed me. It wasn't like the kiss I had imagined, the tentative, questioning one. This was sure. It was a kiss of relief, of confirmation, a conversation we'd been waiting weeks to have. It was warm and soft and tasted faintly of soap and hope. I melted into it, my hands coming up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. And this time, when I felt it beating, strong and steady, I knew it was beating for me. In the weeks that followed, my world, which had been so small and quiet, expanded in a way I never thought possible. Our first date was to an air-conditioned art museum, where we spent hours wandering through quiet galleries. Caleb pointed out the use of light and shadow in landscape paintings, and I explained the principles of typography in modern art posters. We discovered a shared language in the way we both saw the world, a love for composition and beauty. He took me to his small apartment and showed me his sketchbooks, filled with intricate, beautiful designs for gardens that existed only in his mind. They were incredible, full of imagination and a deep understanding of nature. I showed him the projects on my computer, the logos and websites I'd been designing while he worked outside my window. He looked at them with a genuine interest that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. He was nothing like the man I had invented in my head. He was funny and smart and endearingly insecure about his art. He was kind and thoughtful, and he had a laugh that made my entire chest feel warm. Being with him felt easy, like coming home to a place I hadn't known I was searching for. My quiet, orderly life was suddenly filled with his laughter, the scent of his skin, and the comfortable clutter of his work boots by my front door. A few months later, summer had softened into a cool, crisp autumn. We were curled up on my sofa on a chilly Saturday night, a movie playing quietly on the television. The windows were open, letting in the scent of rain and fallen leaves. I was lying back against the cushions, and Caleb was resting with his head on my chest, his arm draped possessively over my stomach. It was our position now, a comfortable, familiar echo of the day it all began. His breathing was deep and even, and I ran my fingers through his hair, enjoying the simple, perfect peace of the moment. He shifted slightly, tilting his head up to look at me. He had a soft, sleepy smile on his face. "You know," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against my ribs. "This is still the best way to cool down." I laughed, a genuine, happy sound that filled the quiet room. "It's 60 degrees out, you liar." "Doesn't matter," he said, pressing a soft kiss to my chest, right over my heart. "It works for everything." He settled his head back down, and I tightened my arm around him, pulling him closer. He was right. It did. Looking back, I think about all the barriers we build for ourselves. The windows we look through, the professional lines we draw, the assumptions we make about people. We create these safe distances to protect ourselves from rejection, from the possibility of getting hurt. For months, Caleb was just a figure in my yard, a man I admired from afar, separated from me by a pane of glass and my own fear. But all it took was one moment of unbearable heat, one act of incredible vulnerability. It took a ridiculous, impossible request to shatter the glass and erase the distance. Sometimes, the most profound connections are born from the most unexpected circumstances. You just have to be willing to open the door when someone knocks, to offer a piece of yourself, and to have the courage to say yes when they ask if they can lean on you. You never know when it might change everything.